A political firestorm is brewing as Democratic politicians whose seats were wiped out are now trying to figure out where to run. Jared Moskowitz seems likely to run in the newly drawn Congressional District 25, which includes Miami Beach and Aventura and runs up the coast through Fort Lauderdale all the way to Boca Raton and Delray Beach. His announcement is expected by the end of next week. The real mystery is what Debbie Wasserman Schultz will do. The longest serving congressional Democrat in Florida, she has been in the House for more than 2 decades. She could run in the new District 22, but it is a district Trump won by 10 points. The more likely option is that she'll run in Congressional District 20, which is solidly Democratic, but it is also an area that has been represented by African Americans for the last 32 years. The district is 40% black, and there are currently at least 4 African Americans running in that seat, which means Wasserman Schultz will be counting on her opponents in the primary, splitting up the African American vote and allowing her to become the nominee. The Broward County Democratic Black Caucus has asked Wasserman Schultz not to run for that seat, and it is clear that if she did run, it would turn into an ugly and potentially racist.
All right, family. Florida just redrew its congressional maps and it created complete chaos. Democrats lost seats. Some of their longest serving members suddenly found themselves in districts where they couldn't win anymore. So now everyone's scrambling and scraping, trying to figure out where they can actually run and still get elected. Enters Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She's been in Congress for over 20 years, a major figure in the Democratic Party, knows how to work the system, get things done. Her old district basically disappeared in a new map, so she needs somewhere to go. There's the district. This district is called District 20. Right there in her backyard in South Florida is solidly Democratic, which means she could actually win there. But here's the catch. The district has been represented by Black Congresspeople for the last 30 years, 3 whole decades. It's been their seat. So Wasserman Schultz decides to run there anyway, and when she does, the Black Caucus loses it. They're telling her she can't run in that district, not because she doesn't live there, not because she doesn't have the votes, but because of her race. I know, right? Why be divisive? Why can't we just embrace all and just vote competence leadership no matter the color? But because she's not black. That is what they're saying. Now, this is where it gets interesting because the exact same people who spend all their time talking about inclusion and fighting discrimination are sitting there saying a white woman cannot represent a black district, quote unquote. They're literally gatekeeping a congressional seat based on skin color. And the crazy part is nobody seems to notice the hypocrisy, or maybe they do and just don't care. And this story exposes something real about how identity politics actually works when you strip away all the good intentions and just look at what people do.
This week, I spoke to State Senator Rosalynn Osgood, who does not believe Wasserman Schultz should run in a seat long held by African Americans.
So, Jim, as you know, the Democratic Party has been held together through the strong coalition of Jews and Black people. We've always worked collaboratively with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Certainly, I represent a district that's multiracial. I try to serve all of my constituents. But when you're Black in America, you have a different lived experience. It is critically important to have someone with your lived experience representing you in Congress to be a part of those conversations, those debates. We're just saying, don't minimize our opportunity. This is exactly what Ron DeSantis' intentions was. If you look at Congressional 20 district areas like Plantation, Sunrise, it's kind of a map where the Black people live. So you pack many of us into one district, you crack out certain parts of the community, like you put Belle Glade in another district, people in Palm Beach. So the Black people's vote and representation is not equal, it's diluted. So if you have a race with 6 Black people in, and Debbie gets in that race, maybe the thought is that the Black people will dilute the vote and it gives her an automatic shoe-in. I don't know if it's the easiest path forward with her. I did talk to her. She explained to me how important seniority is in Congress, and we want to keep her in Congress. But we're just asking her to consider running in the district that she was drawn into, or even in the coastal district where Moskowitz says he's going to run, where it's predominantly Jew. So when you look at what's going on in Broward, particularly Palm Beach and Broward, how the district's being tapped, it kind of gives incumbents like Lois Frankel, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Moskowitz. It's like they're vying to protect their seats. And what we're saying is we've been an ally. We've been a supporter. We want to have someone with our lived experience. Let our community kind of decide through the voting process who that person is going to be.
Well, let me jump in and let me push back a little. As you noted earlier, you represent a multiracial, multicultural district yourself. I'm sure that the whites and Hispanics in your district, think that you probably represent them well and are doing a good job, and you certainly are trying to do the best for them. Could you not see the argument that because of Debbie Wasserman Schultz's seniority, because of her standing in Congress, that she might be able to do things for Congressional District 20 that a freshman member of Congress, like either a Dale Holness or a Luther Campbell or any of the other candidates in there would be able to do?
The difference is when you go back to the history of why this seat was created during this redistricting time in 1992, it was to have people with Black lived experiences in Congress. And we can't move away from that historical fact. It's kind of like, as a Black person, you feel like we had Reconstruction. Then we got the Jim Crow, the poll tax. So now redistricting is being used to suppress our vote. So historically, for us, because of why the seat was created, it's like something is now being taken away from us. And we're just trying to explain and get Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz to understand how important it is to us in our community to have someone with our lived experience. Sure, she might be able to do things for our community, but she doesn't have the lived experience to fight on certain issues and explain why they're important to our community.
Do you envision that if Debbie Wasserman Schultz were to get into District 20, she would be counting on the idea that because there are so many Black candidates already in the race, that they would, as you mentioned earlier, dilute the vote or divvy up the vote, and that she could potentially win the Democratic primary with maybe 30% of the vote, 35% of the vote? Do you think that that if she were to get in the race, that all of the other Black candidates should remain in the race? Or do you think that they should, among themselves, decide to galvanize behind just one candidate? And if that's the case, who do you think that one candidate should be to run against her?
And maybe they will decide to do that. I don't know who that one candidate should be to run against her. I think if she gets into the race, the community will come together and come up with.
All right, so we'll leave it there. Let's look at what they're actually saying and why it doesn't hold water. The main argument comes from State Senator Rosalynn Osgood, as you guys see on the screen, and she says Black people need representation from someone with quote unquote lived experience. That's the phrase everyone uses now. And you need someone who's lived the Black experience to fight Black issues, as she's making it. Only that person can really understand what Black voters care about. Only that person can sit in those rooms in Congress and actually fight for the community. It sounds nice on the surface, but let's think about what that actually means in real practice. Wasserman Schultz has been in Congress for over 20 years. She has seniority. She sits on committees. She knows how to move bills. She knows how to get funding for her district. She's built relationships across both parties. And when she asks for something, people listen. The Black candidates running against her, some of them have never been in Congress before. They're freshmen. They have zero seniority, zero relationships in Washington, zero ability to deliver anything to the district on day one. So the argument is basically this. We are willing to give up a congresswoman with actual power and experience so we can have someone newer with less power, but the right skin color. And that's the trade they're making. But there's something else happening underneath. And what they're really afraid of is that Black voters might actually choose her. That's it. They're worried the math won't work out the way they want it to. 4 Black candidates are running in this primary. If they all stay in the race and split the vote, Wasserman Schultz wins. That's just math. But you know what? That's democracy. That's voters choosing who they want. If black voters decide they want her seniority and her power more than they want racial optics, that's their choice to make. Except the gatekeepers don't want to leave it up to them. They want to decide it before the vote even happens. And they're telling her to get out so there's no chance of that outcome happening. The real issue isn't representation quality, it's control. I mean, here's where this whole situation falls apart. And it shows you something real about what happens when you build a political system around identity instead of actual results. When you glue everything together with race, eventually you run into a wall where you have to pick one thing over the other. And when that moment comes, everyone sees what you actually believe in. This is the DEI backfire, right? It's not about racism or discrimination in some abstract sense. It's about watching the movement forced to show its priorities when those priorities clash with each other. And in this case, they're showing it crystal clear because they would rather lose a senior member with decades of congressional power and then let their so-called minority seat be challenged by someone outside the group. Look at who's actually running in this race with her. One candidate has fraud charges against her. She stole money from her constituents. She was forced to leave Congress, and she's running again anyway. Another candidate is a rapper with zero legislative experience, nothing on his resume, no government background, no track record, no real reason to think he'll be effective in Congress beyond being famous. And you know what the Black Caucus says about either one of them? Absolutely nothing, complete silence. They're not sitting there saying, hey, maybe the person facing federal charges should step aside so our strongest candidate can run. And they're not saying maybe the rapper without any government experience should think about whether he's actually ready for this job. They're not having those conversations at all. The only person they're pressuring to leave is the one with actual congressional experience. That's all I'm saying. And a record of delivering for her district. That silence tells you everything you need to know. And you can take that and think for yourself. I'm just giving you guys the information and we having a conversation. But they don't care about qualification. They don't care about who can do the job better. They don't care about who's going to fight harder for the community. They care about race. And that's it. And that's the whole thing. And are willing to accept criminal representation or completely unqualified representation as long as it's the right skin color. And this is what happens when you hold a political coalition or group together with identity instead of shared principles. And you got Democrats who care about party unity and getting results. And you got Democrats who care about racial solidarity above everything else. And when those two things clash head on, you know which ones wins every single time? The racial solidarity. If that's what she's saying in regards to the matter that they will group together and come together and the community will come together because they want someone that has a lived experience, quote unquote. And it doesn't matter if the person is qualified or not. It doesn't matter if they can deliver or not. What matters is the racial composition is what she's saying. And that's the real problem nobody wants to talk about, because once you told people that group identity matters more than party loyalty, more than governing, more than getting things done, eventually someone's going to take that seriously and just vote based on race and not based on what's actually best for their community. And what they're saying without saying it loud is this: we don't trust black voters to make the right choice. And that's why we have to decide for them before the vote even happens. If they actually trusted black voters, they'll let the black voters decide and not telling her to step down or remove herself when it comes to Wasserman Schultz, because she's a different skin color. They'll let the voters choose. No matter what the skin color, let the voters choose between a senior Democrat with power and a freshman candidate with potential. Let the community pick who they want representing them. But that's not what they're doing. They're pre-deciding it by telling certain candidates they can't even run, which means voters never get to choose between them in the first place. And that's taking away people's right to decide. It's telling them who they're allowed to vote for before the election ever happens. And here's the historical thing that's wild about this. The Democratic Party spent decades fighting Jim Crow laws, fighting poll taxes and literacy tests, all kinds of racial restrictions on who could vote and where people could participate. And they said segregation was wrong, and they fought for integration. They fought for the idea that race shouldn't determine your access to anything in the political system. And now they're enforcing racial restrictions on who can run for office in certain districts. And the mechanism is different, but the principle is the same. And you're being limited by your skin color and where you can participate. And there's no actual consistent principle here either. There's no real rule. There's no rule being applied fairly across the board. If the rule is you can only run in districts where people who look like you live, fine. If that's what you want to do, let that be applied to everyone. If that's the case, having white districts and black districts and Hispanic districts enforce this across the board to everyone equally. But they don't want that. They only want to apply racial restrictions when it benefits their power structure in that moment. I'm just asking a question. And I'm leaving you guys to think for yourself on this. That's just opportunism just up as principle and calling it justice. And here's the part that should actually upset people if they care about their district having real power and real funding. When you trade a 20-year senior congresswoman for a freshman candidate, you're trading actual legislative power for potential that might not never show up. And that has real consequences in the district's wallet. Wasserman Schultz sits on committees. She has relationships with committee chairs. When she calls asking for funding for a school or infrastructure project, people actually take that call because they negotiated with her for years and need her vote on other things. That's how Congress functions. A freshman candidate walks in day one with zero relationships, zero favors, zero power to move anything. And when they ask for that same funding, they get treated like an intern. The difference in actual dollars between those two scenarios isn't theoretical. It's real money that either comes home to District 20 or it doesn't. Millions in grants that don't happen, infrastructure projects that get delayed, constituent services that are slower, and you're trading less money and less power in Congress for racial representation. Maybe that's the choice the community wants to make, but let's be honest about what it cost. A criminal candidate who was forced out of Congress and stole money from the committee is worse than a freshman actively taking resources away. A rapper with zero government experience and zero relationship in Washington is at best useless, at worst a liability, because his inexperience costs the district opportunities and funding. The Black Caucus that she's speaking of is silent on both of those candidates because they don't care about whether money flows home. They care about diversity numbers regardless of impact on residents' lives. And I'm all for diversity. I'm not against it, but I'm saying if an individual qualifies for the job, let's go based on merit and not on skin color, because anyone should have the opportunity, regardless of color, if they can deliver for these communities to help uplift them for the people. It's about the people. And that's the trade being asked. Less money, less power, less effective government for better optics. At some point, you have to ask whether that math makes sense for regular people who want their schools funded and their infrastructure fixed. The accounting logic says it doesn't.
Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz has officially entered the race for Florida's 20th congressional district. The district she currently represents has basically disappeared in Governor DeSantis' new congressional map. She launched her bid to succeed Sheila Sherfulis McCormick, who resigned from Congress last month amid legal and ethics challenges.
I've fought for the people of Broward County my whole adult life. You've always been able to count on me to deliver results for our community. Today, I'm announcing my candidacy for re-election in Congressional District 20. Because we cannot let Trump destroy Broward County's power.
Sherfulis McCormick has since launched her own campaign to reclaim the seat. Wasserman Schultz's decision has some African-American officials and organizations questioning her choice to run for a seat held by Black lawmakers for the last 3 decades. CBS News Miami's Tanya Francois is your reporter in Fort Lauderdale at the African-American Research Library, where she spoke with some of these leaders and groups.
We said, don't run, and we said it loudly because people don't listen to you unless you talk in those terms.
But Debbie Wasserman Schultz says she is running, and that's prompting backlash from much of Broward's Black Democratic base, including from State Senator Chevron Jones, whose district includes a portion of Broward County. He says in a state with 24 million people, if Wasserman Schultz wins, it will be represented by just one Black member of Congress from Florida.
What this is about is Black representation. What this is about is making sure that the individuals who are being represented, they at least have the fighting chance to be represented by someone who has lived their lived experience.
Ashley Gant is a state rep, also a part of Florida's Black Caucus.
If this was always her plan, don't play in our face. Say it. Don't say you're thinking about it and all that. Just say it. Be who you are. Show us who you are.
Her opponents are also speaking out against her decision. The seat is currently vacant after Sheila Sherfulis McCormick resigned during an ethics investigation. She blames her political woes on redistricting, saying her legal battles are not a concern.
You should run where you feel like you're most compatible. And the truth is, today I watched the video and a lot of my constituents sent it, and the one question they all said to me, what is her why? Why this district? Why us?
Elijah Manley is also in the District 20 race.
You're not the candidate of choice for our community. And to ignore that and run anyways just shows you do not respect Black voices, you do not respect the Black community.
You know, I'm very disappointed that we are here in District 20. I'm very troubled also about what is happening because it's dividing our party. Alliances that we've built over time are shattering, and it's unfortunate that we are in this place at this time.
Another candidate in the race, Rudy Moyes, he sent a statement saying Wasserman Schultz's decision to run in District 20 sends the wrong message to Dems all over Florida.
And for the rest of that statement, and for a statement from South Florida rapper Luther Campbell, who is also in the District 20 race, you can go to our website at cbsmiami.com.
Well, family, what I say when I pointed out those points is they're coming at and condemning Wasserman Schultz just for running, but you have one candidate, as you guys seen, who committed fraud, which is this woman here, and basically stole taxpayer monies, and Wasserman Schultz can say, hey, you the one that violated illegality as a public official, and then she can say the same thing for him. Oh, you're just a rapper with no experience, right? So what I'm saying is, let's focus on results and keep it about the community, no matter who runs, and let the community decide, instead of just throwing personal ad hominem attacks or name calling or, things like that. And what the actual lesson here, and why should you care about Florida politics if you don't even live there? Or if you do live there? This isn't about defending Wasserman Schultz. She's a career politician. She can handle herself. She's got money and lawyers and connections. This is about the logic being used against her and what it reveals about how we think about representation and democracy in this country. The central contradiction is simple. You can't claim to oppose discrimination while enforcing racial gatekeeping at the same time. You can't say you believe in equal treatment and then tell people where they can run for office based on their race. Those two things are fundamentally incompatible. They're in direct conflict with each other. But this movement is trying to hold both of them at the same time, and it's falling apart as a result. And when someone talks about needing quote unquote lived experience in politics, what they're really saying underneath is only people who look like you can understand your problems, and only people who look like you can fight for you. And that's insulting to voters because it assumes they can't think past racial identity, and it assumes that a voter will automatically care more about a candidate's skin color than about their track record or their ability to deliver actual results for the community. And the real game being played here is about power and control. And this isn't about serving constituents better. It's about deciding which Democrats get safe seats in Congress. Is about making sure certain groups keep their allocated spots, regardless of who the best candidate actually is. And once you understand that, everything else makes sense. And when you hear politicians talking about inclusion and progress, start asking questions about what that really means. What are they including and what are they excluding? Who gets to decide? Because here in Florida, inclusion apparently means excluding candidates based on race. Be skeptical of any political movement that makes skin color the primary qualification for holding office, because that's just old school gatekeeping dressed up in new school language with better marketing. And I want to know what you think about all of this. Does this logic track, or do you see the problem? Tell me in the comments where you land on representation and identity, and pay attention to how these arguments play out in your own community. This is power working through identity. And if this helped, hit the like button and share and subscribe if you want analysis that actually cuts through the noise instead of just selling you a narrative. Now, here's what should concern people beyond Florida, because this isn't an isolated incident anymore. It's becoming a template that other groups are watching closely. When one part of a coalition or a political group successfully enforces racial gatekeeping or representation, other groups start asking why they shouldn't get the same protection and power. And you're going to see Hispanic Democrats demanding Hispanic seats that can't be challenged by non-Hispanics. You're going to see Asian Democrats making the exact same case for their districts. Jewish Democrats pushing back, saying certain areas belong to them. And suddenly you don't have a political party anymore. You have ethnic factions competing for allocated territory and designated power, which is so divisive, by the way, and not unity. And we should be in unity, and we should just be working for what's best for the community and working together. We're better together than apart. And the system doesn't work that way, because once you said representation is about race first and actual results second, you open the door to every group claiming ownership of seats. And the Democratic Party in Florida is already showing deep cracks from this single race because you got longstanding Jewish black political partnerships suddenly fractured over one election. Allies who worked together for decades are now on opposite sides because the rules changed and somebody decided identity matters more than partnership and shared goals. And that's what kills political groups and coalitions, not disagreements on policy, but disagreements on who's allowed to have what power and representation. The bigger problem is what this does to regular voters who just want somebody in office who can actually get things done. A voter in District 20 doesn't wake up thinking about the racial composition of Congress. We are more diverse in this country than ever, and it's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful thing. Different perspectives. We come together in unity. We learn from each other, and they're thinking about whether their representative can bring home funding for schools, whether they'll fight for better infrastructure, whether they'll have actual power to deliver results. But that's not almost a side issue. Something secondary to making sure the racial math works out correctly. That's a losing formula because candidates start focused on identity appeals instead of demonstrating competence. Donors care about diversity optics instead of actual effectiveness, and parties start protecting seats instead of winning elections. And you end up with representatives chosen because of who they are rather than what they can accomplish. And while that might feel symbolically important short term, it means worse representation and less real power for the communities those representatives are supposed to serve. And the Florida redistricting already cost Democrats seats in Washington, and now they're compounding that mistake by putting gatekeeping rules on who can run where. And that's a strategy that loses not just individual races, but weakens the entire state delegation because you're abandoning candidates who could win in mixed districts just to protect demographic purity and designated ones. And what happens next is Republicans see the fracture and start recruiting candidates who can appeal across racial lines, while Democrats are enforcing separation. And this isn't theoretical. It's already happening in other states where Democrats have done similar things. And once you created the framework saying certain people can't represent certain areas, you undercut the entire argument for integration and real coalition building of coming together. And you're actually proving that identity is the dividing line in politics, which contradicts everything Democrats said they believed in. So when you look at that and actually digging into what choosing identity over merit does to the quality of government and representation, you're not just picking a different person. You're fundamentally changing what qualifications mean in that office. And when merit becomes optional and identity becomes mandatory, you create a system where getting a job depends on checking a box instead of proving you can do the work. And Wasserman Schultz wasn't in Congress for 20 years because she was gifted or had the right demographics. She was there because she won elections and moved bills through a system that requires both. She knows committee structure. She knows how to negotiate with Republicans. She knows how to trade favors and build coalitions because that's how Congress actually functions. None of that knowledge automatically transfers to someone new just because they share a racial background with the voters. Just saying as an example, a freshman congressperson, no matter how well intentioned, walks into an office without allies, without seniority, without the relationships to actually get the things done. On day one, they have zero power to deliver anything. And by year 5, they might have built something. By year 20, they're actually dangerous in committee rooms because people have learned they can count on them. And that's how power works in Congress. It's accumulated over time through relationships and demonstrated results. And you can't shortcut that by voting for someone with the right skin color and expecting the same output. The gatekeepers aren't worried about that problem, though. They're not seeing we need to invest in developing Black candidates into seasoned legislators because that takes time and patience. They're saying we need to protect designated seats for Black candidates right now, this election, without waiting for any of them to build experience. And what you get from that is junior representatives who can't deliver what senior representatives can. And it's objectively worse representation in terms of actual legislative power. You could argue that symbolic representation matters. So much is worth the trade-off. Fine. Make that argument, but don't pretend you're doing it in the interest of the community, getting better services or more funding or more legislative victories. You're doing it for something else entirely. And the other part of this is what it does to the candidates themselves. If you're a Black candidate running in District 20 and you know the gatekeepers have already decided you have to win because of your race, what's your motivation to actually get better at politics? What's your motivation to study policy or build relationships or develop expertise? You already got the seat locked down by identity, so why develop merit? The system creates the opposite incentive of what you want. Instead of attracting ambitious politicians who want to prove themselves and build careers, you attract people who are satisfied being selected rather than proven. And that's not cynicism. That's just how incentives work. People respond to the rules you set, And if the rules is you need to be black to win this seat, then black politicians know that's their path and they don't have to compete for anything else. Meanwhile, the system loses candidates who might have been more effective and more driven because they knew they had to actually prove something to get there. The competence questions matter because a congressperson controls a budget, staffs, constituent services, makes votes on national legislation, sits on committees, represent their district in negotiations with the federal government. And these are not ceremonial positions. These are real jobs with real consequences for real people. And you can't hand those jobs out based on diversity requirements and expect the same outcomes as you get from people who earned them by demonstrating competence, no matter the race. It doesn't work that way. You're not being mean-spirited or racist by pointing this out. You're just observing how actual governance functions. Every business, every military, every institution that gets results does it by prioritizing competence and critical roles. You wouldn't want somebody in the military, or you wouldn't want someone leading the military as the top of the top if they don't have competence to basically protect this country and serve as they do within the freedoms and everything that we have, embraced and being able to enjoy, which is amazing and a blessing. And happy belated Memorial Day to those, which was yesterday. As a recording of this video is April 26th. Not April, May 26th, 2026. Sorry, family, not April. Woof. But anyway, family, I want to know what you guys think about this. All right. I said enough. And you have to look at, are you literally choosing lower efficiency to protect the principle that voters didn't ask for? Right. And I'll just let that be that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, got value from it. As always, we're having a conversation. I love you guys. Let the love supersede the hate. Spread that peace, love, and positivity always. On that note, peace.